Welcome everybody to another edition of the PSVR Chat Show. My name is Godcannon from PSVR Underground on YouTube, and I'll be your guest host for the evening. We are here today with Victor Matos and Spencer Peterson from Labrodex Studios to talk about their upcoming title, Scraper, First Strike, out in North America and Europe on July 2nd for $19.99. And joining us today, we have the artist behind creating this wonderful room for us. We've got Dorky the Awkward, Lina, Jules, Waverly, Noctauto, Velp, and of course Jason, our producer. We also have some fellow PSVR YouTubers joining us as well. We've got Chris from Shugghead Gaming and Justin from Just Incredible VR. Thank you, Spencer and Victor, for joining us today to talk about Scraper First Strike. How are both of you doing today?
Yeah, we're doing pretty well, I'd say.
Pretty good.
Excellent, excellent. Well, we're really excited to have you guys. We've got loads of questions to ask about the game, but before we begin, I want to know just a little bit more about the both of you and Labrodex first.
Sure. So my game development career started actually actively during college. I used to work in an educational game startup, and then after graduating college, I actually was picked up by Labrodex Studios. There, I started off with largely programming responsibilities, and then as I became involved with Jim and executing his vision of Scraper, I kind of took more responsibilities in terms of game design, balancing, even kind of organizing like voice actors together and getting the lines all recorded, and then that quickly became a project manager role for me, which is what I do now.
And I'm Spencer. I guess my start at Labrodex was as a QA tester. That was just last year for Scraper First Strike. So when I came along, most of the game was already finished. But moving into a QA engineer role and then technical designer role for later titles, I did a lot of balance work and a lot of work on the PSVR ports. So yeah, that's me.
Excellent. Well, we're so thrilled to have you guys.
So I know you asked a little bit earlier kind of about Labrodex and, what kind of company we are. Labrodex, we're ultimately a VR and AR solutions company. What that means is that we're willing to engage into any product as long as it's in virtual reality or augmented reality. So games, Scraper First Strike being one of them, is an example of one of the things that we do, but we also do a good amount of enterprise work with clients and just there's lots of business with VR and AR. So that's pretty much what we do.
Excellent. Yeah, I actually took a peek at your website and I noticed it was more than just Scraper. There was a lot of different involvements in different VR and AR, different activities and job listings, all sorts of things. So that's really cool how involved you guys are with VR and AR in general. So I was wondering, when Labrodex first opened, it consisted of only about 5 people, including the CEO, Jim Ivan. About how many people work there these days?
Yeah, so right now we have about a dozen people in office. As far as including our remote team, which includes the artists, the voice actors, we're running about 25-ish people, give or take. So that's kind of what we kind of got ourselves into when we built a game, kind of like Scraper First Strike. We ended up realizing we needed more artists, more voice actors, more talent in general to be able to kind of get the fidelity that we were, for development.
Right. Actually, if you look at most indie VR developers these days, a lot of them are actually consisting of just like 2 or 3 people. So to a normal company, that may sound like a small group, but to us, that's actually a lot of people.
Okay. Fair.
So Spencer, please share a little of your background, how you discovered Labrodex, and what your role is as a games designer there.
So as far as my background, I started making mods for RPGs and publishing them, and it got to the point where I was like, man, someone should pay me to do this. So I started looking around for entry-level jobs in the industry and found one at Labrodex. And so I started out as a QA engineer, just doing testing, logging bugs. eventually getting to the point where I was fixing bugs instead of just asking people to do it for me and loading up the task log. And that was my role on Scraper. And now for an upcoming title of ours, I'm working as a technical designer, and a lot of that is just coming up with gameplay systems and working directly with engineers to come up with how they are implemented. So, yeah, that's me.
Excellent. Well, also, Victor, so please tell me a little about your history and how you discovered Labrodex, and what kind of responsibilities do you have as the project manager?
Absolutely. So, kind of a little bit about my background. I actually, during a big part of my computer science degree, I was part of a company called Immersed Games. It's an educational game startup in Gainesville, Florida. Well, it was in Gainesville, Florida. Now I think they're in Buffalo, New York these days. And there I actually started up as an intern and then got to more of a management role, designer role. Really, it's kind of strange to me because it really was exactly kind of what I'm doing right now, which is doing whatever it takes to get the game moving along, whether that's design work, whether it's programming work, whether that's actually managing the tasks. And at some point, I basically was such a part of that team, a big part of that team, that I was kind of elevated to co-founder status. That's a strange terminology, but that is what was explained to me. And so I kind of embraced that role a little bit. However, I did have to finish my computer science degree. So, because I was still very well in college, for reasons, I decided to kind of split ways with Immersed Games. And then that left me available in the job market, basically having solid 3 years of game development experience, basically from the ground up. And I guess at some point, Jim had a hold of my application and saw that, an entry-level student that had a good amount of experience. And there I started off doing more. I was actually strictly a programmer when I first started at Labrodex, and then just kind of like over time escalated to a designer and then project manager after I started getting more responsibilities in terms of like executing Jim's vision for the game.
Excellent. Well, we're really glad you guys landed up where you did, that's for sure. So wonderful. So thank you for sharing that. Now let's move on to the game, shall we? So what is Scraper First Strike?
I can take this one. Scraper First Strike is a hybrid RPG shooter that is built from the ground up for full motion in VR. So, it's about kind of driving into combat this personal tank we call the modified hover pod. And that was imagined as a way to make full motion in VR something that was not only feasible, but comfortable and fun.
Excellent. So it takes place in New Austin, right? And is Labrodex, you guys are based out of New York?
Yeah, we're in Melville, New York, in Long Island.
So I got to ask, why New Austin and why not New York or something like New Denver?
New Scranton?
Yeah. So for the location, we actually weren't completely sure, where the location for this place, for this story would take place. A really big reasoning behind going with New Austin is simply that we would basically have open creativity as far as how the place is built. Whereas if we went with something that's already kind of like precedented, like New York, well, now we'd have to run into a giant pre-production phase of making sure that we built New York in all of its glory and making sure those details are correct. So, there's a lot of kind of creative hurdles that kind of went with doing something like New York. So we decided to go with New Austin instead, because that's basically gives us just open liberty with, what we want to do with the title.
Well, Austin is a very cool place, so it's a very good choice.
It's true.
Anyways. So speaking of story, First Strike has a novel prequel that expands on the lore. which is written by acclaimed author Ryder Wyndham, who has written over 50 Star Wars books and several others. Is the plan to have Ryder release a book in between each game that is released?
Yeah, so this is actually a pretty interesting question that we've asked ourselves. So really big part of having the prequel is to set up a good foundation for the game and basically for us to know kind of what we're doing, as far as kind of a world and universe. We knew that we didn't necessarily at the time had the capital or resources to like build an entire lore from the ground up. So in a weird way, we kind of like did accomplish that with the prequel. And then we had to give less explanation for it. In reality, it was just a really good way for us to get straight into development of the game rather than kind of tackling the behemoth that is setting up this like super big IP from the start. So really the prequel is to basically launch the IP.
Excellent. And that book, the prequel, will be available, of course, right? It's already available?
Yeah, so the prequel is available online in Amazon. It's actually, if you check your codex inside the game, it's available as an option to read there too. We have like an in-game VR book reader. And it's definitely just something that we wanted to make sure that every single player had the ability to read.
Right. That's actually how I'm going to end up reading it, but I'm definitely grabbing a copy of that for sure.
For sure.
All right, so now, Shug, you are up, man.
Well, thanks again, guys, for joining us. I've said it before, but I think the Scraper First Strike is definitely one of the games that PSVR headsets need to keep their eyes on. It looks awesome. You already talked about the fact that it's kind of a full-motion VR game, and that excites me. I love VR, pushing VR boundaries, and I'm tired of standing in place and throwing objects. So super excited to jump into your game. Can you elaborate on the game mechanics, I guess, that I guess we're going to run into, and also as that relates to kind of supported controllers?
Sure. So, yeah, I can take this one. As far as game mechanics, you as Lieutenant Casey Maxwell are exploring a kind of super tall skyscraper that has been taken over by hostile robots. You go from level to level, getting into combat encounters, solving engineering puzzles, and it's the scrap you get from those encounters that forms the basis of your build, basically, because you use it to build new weapons, build new mods. You get weapon schematics from some of the game's most notable enemies. So there's that very fun loop that you might remember from something like Mega Man, where you see Cut Man use a big scissors and think, oh man, I can't wait to use that big scissors. Well, we have something like that. So yeah, that's kind of the basis of the engineering system. You asked about peripherals, and we support all of them. So that is, or at least all of them on PSVR currently. So that is the motion controllers, of course. We also support the DualShock 4 controller, the aim controller, and the 3D rudder. Which is that out yet, or?
Oh yeah, the 3D rudder is out. It's available to purchase right now. Also, don't forget, we also support the left-handed and right-handed mode on the DualShock. On both the DualShock and the PS aim. So.
Yeah, so lefties who use the aim controller should know that not only do we have them covered, we have them covered whether they want to hold the aim controller as a right-handed person would or as a left-handed person would. So I think when we started talking about the PSVR port, it was kind of a no-brainer that we would want to support the widest array of users possible.
Yeah, that's awesome. I always am. I'm always preaching options. Give gamers options, especially in VR, because everybody's got their own capabilities, I guess. And so us hardcore gamers, like I see GC, they're not shaking his head. We love to go fast and have full VR experiences where others can't necessarily do that. There's also peripheral limitations for some people. I'm super psyched for the rudder. I think a lot of people are going to be psyched to play with the aim controller. So thank you so much for giving everybody the option to play the way we want to play. Can you elaborate a little bit on kind of like the mission system, consumables, RPG systems? Because it sounds like you've got a little bit of that going on in there.
Yeah, one of my favorite things about our system of combat is that the player always is, it's not only selecting what weapon I'm bringing into this encounter, but you are always dual wielding in Scraper First Strike, which was one of my early favorite things about it. And so, the most basic part of your build, you might say, is which two weapons you are equipping in your right and your left slot. You also mentioned items. You have 2 item slots as well as 2 ability slots. So, yeah, that's kind of the basis of your loadout.
Awesome.
As far as the mission system goes, some of the characters introduced in that prequel novel you mentioned, they are the ones who kind of guide you through Scraper First Strike and are your point men and women back at home base. So they are, communicating with you throughout your adventure and leading you from mission to mission.
So is it fairly linear then, the kind of the mission structure as it takes you through the narrative?
It is, but with different paths and opportunities to revisit previous areas and discover new things.
Awesome. Well, I'm getting a bit of a Battlezone on steroids with a really good story kind of vibe. So cannot wait to jump into it. I will pass that off to Jason there.
Oh yeah, there's some people that aren't going to have their VR legs, of course, yet. Are there any comfort options that you guys have put in there to help out with anybody that
Sure thing. So one of the things I think that Spencer had already elaborated on is just the existence of the pod frame. So before, this is a little quick insider, we actually did not have a dashboard the same way it is laid out here in the game. It was actually just a chair with weapons. What we quickly found out was, one, when you don't kind of have that like hull or that frame of reference to kind of like ground you a little bit, you get motion sickness fairly quickly. And so even people that had really strong VR legs would bring it up to us and be like, hey, can't really, it's neat that you could do full locomotion, but I can't play this for more than 15 minutes. So this prompted us to try to figure out, okay, well, what do we go about, how do we go about addressing this problem? And we decided to, incorporate frame of reference. So there's this dashboard now, which also let us tinker with the idea of just additional VR interactions in the game, such as the pod lever, the SRU, the buttons, as well as the pod monitor. And so it kind of double, answered a problem for us. We got additional VR interactions from it, and then we also were able to fix, you can't entirely fix VR sickness yet, but kind of ameliorated it. And so, on top of that, there's definitely also additional comfort controllers in the menu. Shugghead actually talked about choices and, just kind of giving layers of accessibility for players. Everyone kind of has different standards of what they can actually accomplish in virtual reality. And, for us, we thought it made the most sense to add snap rotation, no snapping, teleport movement, and all those, including vignetting and all those what is now standard VR comfort controls.
Yeah, and just to kind of piggyback off that, I think we have balanced the different difficulty levels and such to try and take into account users who, like you mentioned, don't quite have their VR legs yet. For ones that do, they can turn their motion in the game all the way up. They can turn off snap rotation and just be zooming around and playing this almost like an old-fashioned, 90s style quick movement FPS almost. For people at the other end of the spectrum who are more interested in things like snap turn, teleport movement. They can turn their movement speed all the way down, play it at a lower difficulty, and still have a great time.
That's awesome. Definitely appreciate the accessibility options. When you guys were testing in the office, were you prone to motion sickness, and how did you guys get around that if you were in that case? That must have made for interesting testing, I'm sure.
Yeah.
From what you were saying.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think, a big part of before the dashboard happened, I certainly had a little bit of motion sickness, but that is also because, funny enough, Scraper First Strike was actually my first time in VR in general. So that development, I had no legs whatsoever. I had negative legs. So with that, it was really easy for me to, kind of get a little bit motion sickness. But, as I kind of got more adapted more to the VR in general, it didn't become a problem. And at that point, the problem was that now I can't experience the game a new user would experience the game, right? The way a new user would experience the game. So that was kind of when we started doing more user testing, kind of seeing what people thought, did a bunch of user testing surveys, and we had like a separate section on like motion sickness, and then we had to figure out, okay, we had to actually do something about this and make it more accessible. Initially it was a problem, then it got better over time with vignetting, adding the pod frame of reference. Honestly, after the frame of reference, like we actually did another user testing survey after that, and we saw that we got like it was a 1 through 10 like score rating. I'm like how much motion sickness do you feel compared to other VR games, where 5 is the same as any VR game, and then as you get to 10 it's more and 1 is less. And we went from like a 6.5 average down to like a 4.2, which was phenomenal considering that we are a fast-paced like action game in VR and trying to do full locomotion.
Yeah, coming into the development process for this game pretty late, at least in relation to most of my coworkers. The only, just to share a little bit of like in development, just a kind of funny story. The only real VR sickness I got was from an enemy we had that kind of does this left to right sweep with this minigun. And we had this very short-lived bug that we caught very quickly where the left-to-right sweep would actually carry you with it, kind of dragging you. And let me tell you, I didn't understand what VR sickness was until that moment. And then it was just like, oh, I'm taking a break for the rest of the day. And so it's kind of funny as a developer, you start to understand why all these guidelines like, hey, never move the player without, just don't move the player, let that be in control of that. You understand exactly why all of those kind of rules of the genre are there. So anyway, that was a kind of funny gameplay development moment.
Well, I'm sure you've got to run through those kind of hurdles to get to where you're at. Nothing's ever going to be perfect on the first run. That would be
really
pretty
interesting.
amazing.
Yeah, I never once thought, because I hear developers all the time talking about, well, we left the snap turning in and stuff because we were getting sick. And I'm like, how do you get sick if you're making a VR game? And I never once thought that, hey, maybe this is the first time they're doing VR. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, now we've got a question from Justin Incredible VR. Take it away, Justin.
All right, awesome. So when entering the world of Scraper, what kind of enemies will we be coming across? And is there anything like boss fights or any RPG mechanics that you've added to the combat? What can you say about that?
Let me say there are boss fights, multiple of them, and they are big and scary. As far as enemies go, we separate our enemies in kind of different almost technology tiers that kind of to explain them would go a little bit into the lore of the world. There's your militia bots, and they're kind of smaller in stature, and they wield a variety of different weapons, and they are a fun enemy to fight against just because they don't have a lot of resiliency. but we can throw them at the player in kind of bigger groups, and they get different weapons as you progress through the game. And so that's kind of fun to see which new militia bot is around the corner wielding what. Going up a step from there, you have your more menacing Legionites, which are tall, very strong, kind of humanoid robots, and you also have various drones and whatnot. You asked about RPG mechanics. They all have their own unique kind of array of resistances, like you would see in any number of modern RPGs. And so you are, as a player, kind of always swapping on the fly between your 6 weapons. That's not 6 total weapons in the game. That's just the amount you can carry with you at any given time. So that is kind of one of my most favorite parts of combat, is always swapping on the fly based on what we throw at you.
Very cool. Yeah, I'm excited to come across those bosses.
Yeah.
So in terms of the boss fights, is there any usually like strategy involved similar to the enemies where they have different weak spots, different resistances?
Yeah, there is. I would say the bosses all kind of, you know, like you might expect from the medium, have their own different move sets that you as a player want to kind of watch and learn from in the first couple minutes of the encounter, because that will teach you how to avoid the biggest and worst and most damaging of those moves. So yeah, we tried to make sure they each fit different roles. So that includes resistances, like you said, but that also includes like everything from the boss's like characterization, their voice lines, the way they move, the way they attack the player. So yeah, we tried to strike different tones with all of them, and I think they're some of the most fun parts of the game.
Yeah,
Awesome.
if I can also add, a really big inspiration from the boss fights was actually World of Warcraft. So you can expect to see a good amount of like kind of like problem solving elements in there in terms of like, how do I go about like tackling this problem? Why am I getting hurt? How do I not get hurt next time?
Excellent. Well, as a former holy paladin, I'm really looking forward to that. So
I think we
now
have a
we've
few
got...
of those in the office.
nice. Yeah. Always healer when I can. And now we're going to go ahead and shift over to Shugghead. Shugghead, what do you got for us?
So you guys have already kind of talked a little bit about the decision making behind going with kind of the a pod versus just a soldier with armor. Can you elaborate any more? Like, I guess what I'm trying to get at is you talked about it being kind of put in there as a necessity to increase comfort for full motion gaming. But were there any other reasons, behind that decision of giving us kind of a little armored tank?
The first thing is that Casey Maxwell, like if you would read the prequel, then there's kind of like a lore explanation as to why Casey Maxwell is utilizing the pod in the first place. What we did do during development is we added the dashboard, but that's we always knew that we were going to have Casey Maxwell as a pilot in the pod. So there are lore explanations in the book as to why we wanted to do that. But in terms of kind of like, we knew we needed to add VR interactions. And so the pod is basically a vessel for VR interactions and how we can go about displaying like user interfaces in a diegetic environment. Like one thing is to be able to like open up a menu on your watch, right? Another thing though is like contextually speaking, where's your information? Right, like rather than like, oh, this is just like a UI layer that's kind of in front of me. That's like less kind of like VR interactive, in my opinion. I think a really big part of our game is making sure that you felt like you were the pilot behind, in your pod.
That is definitely pretty incredible. I love the fact that instead of just pressing buttons and doing left and right, I mean, you're actually pulling these levers, you're pressing these buttons, you're doing your watch, you're pressing the EMP, the toggles, all this stuff. It looks really, really immersive, and I think it's really cool to have that. It really shows off the beauty of what VR can do.
I just wanted to kind of piggyback off what Victor said. I think VR is uniquely suited to those kind of games where you are the pilot, be it of a spacecraft or a big mech or whatever. But I think one of the aspects that makes Scraper's version of that kind of experience is unique is doing it at a more human scale. So, as you've experienced in the game, you're kind of in these human scale environments.
Excellent.
That's awesome. And I was just going to say that as a huge sci-fi nerd myself, one of my favorite things is just the tech. I love just like seeing the tech in movies or games. So surrounding me with your version of sci-fi tech is just like a kid in a candy store. My last question about the pods, a question that I think a lot of people are probably wondering. Can you give us a bit of a rundown on the weapons that we're going to get to use and any of the abilities that the pods have, I guess, outside of just movement?
Sure. You start off with dual blasters and a shotgun, which is pretty gnarly at close range. And you soon get things like up close flamethrower type spread weapons and some more sniper or missile launcher style arms. Just to give you a run through of a few of what you get. One of your starter pod abilities is also a localized EMP blast, and that is useful for when melee enemies are running up on you, and you need to just kind of have a get out of jail free card almost. Right? Yeah. Disables them, not forever, but for a good 5 seconds, which is enough time to kind of get your bearings and go in for a quick melee attack or just turn tail and run away entirely. You also start with a powerful ultimate attack, which is that lever.
Go ahead, give it a
yeah. There you go. That is the
rec one too,
version.
I think, right?
Yeah.
It's a little bit bigger of a laser, but this is really great work by the team.
This is still a very respectable laser. So. Yeah.
We couldn't have you blasting us in the chairs.
Valid.
Well, thanks. That pretty much gives me exactly what I needed to just get my excitement going even more. That wraps up my questions here around the pod, though. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, sure.
All right, now Jason's got a question for us. Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, I know you guys touched a little on the modifications. I'm just curious to know how they work as far as like trading, scavenging, or as engineering is concerned. What kind of different things will we expect? I mean, you kind of touched on a little on the weapons and stuff, but is there any other kind of modifications that we haven't heard of yet that we can be looking forward to?
Yeah, sure. So any piece of equipment on your pod loadout can be modified. Anything that shows up on your equipment screen has slots for that. So that includes your EMP, that includes your shields, that includes your pod's power core. So you could, for example, install a set of mods to make your pod abilities cost less energy, almost like increasing your mana pool if this were a game with wizards and knights. Yeah, and so as far as getting mods for different pod systems, that's all about defeating enemies, and then from the scrap that you scavenge, saying like, hey, I have this many of this chip, what do I want to allocate it toward? Do I want to allocate it toward my shields for more survivability, or do I want to build this super cool railgun? And you get to decide.
That's
yeah.
awesome.
Sorry, if I could just add on and even add a little side note too. So kind of elaborating on what Spencer was talking about. One of the biggest reasons why we had the modification system is to kind of allow pick your own flavor of a specific weapon. So each weapon can have up to and each equipment can have up to 2 mod slots. I believe most of them right now have only 1, but there's this like we coded in this like chance that when you build a new weapon or a new equipment piece that they'd give you 2. So it's like a quick like thing if you like want to really like fully deck out your pod, have more mod slots available. That is an option that is available for you. And so, one of the things that we kind of ran into during development was, okay, well, as far as like a shield mod goes, like, okay, well, how many different ways can we like have the shield functionality work in terms of like, okay, there's a lot of different parts to it. There's the part where like how much total shield energy do you get? How fast does your shield regenerate, and how long will it take in order for your shield to come back? And so everyone just kind of had their own kind of idea in terms of like what made a shield, good. And we wanted to kind of let the player have a choice in saying, okay, how do I like to play? Do I like to just like, wait in a spot until my shield recharges to a full max like points of like 300 points? Or would I rather just have a shorter shield, but a shield that regenerates quicker when I don't take damage for a set period of time? So we really want to kind of empower players to be able to kind of like pick on how they want to go about kind of optimizing their own pod.
That sounds really awesome. And to everyone out there wondering if you're not sure which way to go, always do attack, attack, attack. Because you can stay alive forever, but if you can't kill the enemies, then they got you over time. All right, let's go ahead and take it back over to Justin.
All right, perfect. So I think we can all agree a good soundtrack is extremely important when it comes to video games, and especially when it comes to virtual reality. It can set the level of immersion and create a certain level of intensity or inspiration, fear, sadness, all sorts of different emotions. And so speaking of good soundtracks, I know you guys have acquired award-winning Winifred Phillips, who's been an impressive audio engineer and musician for a very long time. And so I understand that she's done work on like God of War, and I realize I've been humming her songs from Little Big Planet for a decade now. And so how exactly did you guys meet Winifred in the first place? So what was it like working with her?
It really was that we saw the game, the music files, and, it became very clear. I'm like, who is our music artist for this? Like, because this has like kind of like notes there that are like, whoa, this is like not just your regular like marketplace assets. This is like, it feels like it was uniquely composed for these moments. And then, I head over to Jim and he's like, oh yeah, that was Winifred Phillips. And I was like, okay.
That is missing in so many other VR games.
Yeah.
It's like really refreshing to see it here. Like it's
super
important.
epic. Gave me some really big like Starship Trooper vibes.
Well, and
Nice.
the experience Victor's talking about just like opening the editor and saying like, oh wow, this thing. It's a really pleasant kind of part of game design because it takes so many people to make one project that it's just like maybe one day you'll open the editor and a new suite of animations are there and you can just click through them and just kind of enjoy yourself. So getting to stumble upon someone else's work is a daily kind of delight.
Wait. You mean stepping into somebody else's work?
That's it.
Or rather, being part of somebody else. Sorry. I definitely feel that.
And the soundtrack is also supposed to be available as well separately, right? Isn't it? Don't you have the whole OST available on YouTube or?
Yeah, I don't think it was quite us that did this, but somebody took that soundtrack and put it on YouTube, which is perfectly fine. We also have that same soundtrack available on Steam as a free downloadable content. I do wonder though if you're able to download that from Steam if you don't have the base game. That is a question I don't know the answer to, but we did provide the soundtrack because it was just that darn good.
Yeah, it's excellent. Well, thank you for sharing anyways. We really appreciate it and definitely look forward to hearing the whole thing. All right, now we're going to take it back over to Shug, who's got something that us PSVR users in particular are going to want to hear.
Yeah, I guess as my closing question to you guys, for us PSVR headsets, Is there any additional, I guess, exclusive content, end-game content, trophies, anything you can elaborate on that we can look forward to, I guess, as PSVR users?
I don't know, game balance is kind of my wheelhouse. It's probably my favorite thing about development. And so for the PSVR release, it was an opportunity to take a look at almost every one of our combat encounters and take a pass on them, saying like, how can we make this group of enemies more fun? How can we make this encounter more dynamic? So in many ways, the level-to-level experience of this game, it's a great feeling to know that this is the gameplay-wise, I think, the best version of First Strike yet. Of course, PC users are going to have those new kind of revamped encounters patched in, but you asked about endgame content too, and we have some higher-level encounters that kind of occur post-campaign on our different levels that are brand new to the PSVR release. We also took a pass on the mod system to pretty much rework it from a usability standpoint. So we're really excited to get that in people's hands.
Yeah, if I can elaborate too, I believe the PSVR version, you don't have to have a redeem code thing. I think we have like in the Oculus version. So the book as well as the railgun, that's something that we incorporate in PSVR without any need for like a redeem code at all. And then I believe, I think one of this kind of ties over a little bit with kind of why we delayed the game. And it is simply because, we wanted to make sure that we polished the PSVR controls. We added those new controls, the 3D rudder, the aim controllers. Really, that time that we took helped us kind of polish and give kind of actually what the VR community wanted in Reddit. Like those were all kind of suggestions that were left on as comments for us, and we took it to heart and we're like, okay, well, this is what people are asking for. Let's just do it.
Good job, Reddit. I appreciate you guys out there. If any of you from Reddit are watching, having peripherals, having all the different comfort options, this is huge for us, guys. I know a lot of developers aren't aware, but I mean, it can affect your sales greatly, not just supporting like only one controller, one peripheral. Even if it's not perfect, everybody just appreciates having the different options to do it. So really, really great that you guys were able to listen to the feedback and actually help that make the change in the game. That's really important. I do have to ask though, does it have a platinum trophy?
So there is a platinum trophy available in our game. If you accomplish all of the other trophies, which I believe you have to accomplish, hard mode is one of our trophies, which, for us, we actually had scaled the game. Our normal experience is, from what we found, pretty tough, but we wanted to make it so that you had to at least kind of experiment a little bit kind of with the enemy resistances and with the kind of with the boss fights. We wanted to make sure that a normal playthrough incorporated a little bit of kind of adaptations. Like you can't just autopilot the game and just shoot people. If you want that, you can play it on easy. Whereas hard is just another level of okay, well, now I need to actually make sure that my movements are actually very meaningful, and then my cooldowns are that I have that internal timer in my head. So we do have a platinum trophy. We're curious as what the turnouts are going to be in terms of people that get it, and we're very excited to see.
That's awesome. So a lot of plotting and scheming and strategy involved there for that hard mode, it sounds like, which that's kind of my jam, so I'm looking forward to that.
Nice.
Good luck.
So Scraper Episode 2, which is currently titled Sudden Death, has already been in development for quite some time. We can't wait to get our hands on Episode 1, but how does the series plan to expand moving forward? Is it going to just continue the story, or is there going to be new locations and gameplay mechanics as well? And will any save data transfer over from First Strike?
Sure. So with Scraper, Sudden Death, we are very well into pre-production for that. The story is all laid out, written. The game design documents, we have that pretty fleshed out. At this point, it really is kind of like us figuring out the scope of it, like how big do we want to make it, right? Which is definitely contingent on kind of like the activity of the sales and things like that, because we do want to provide a really awesome, really epic moment for episode 2. There is, from a narrative standpoint, like a really, really exciting set of events that occur, and we need to nail that moment in particular. But with that said, we really did think we really did think that with episode 1, we wanted to just kind of use that as the pilot for the IP. And we're looking to definitely kind of make it even better for the second episode. And really just kind of comes down to kind of the engagement that we see with it. We have a story to tell, and we want to deliver the best thing that we can.
Excellent. So some of the mechanics and stuff might expand and change a little bit, maybe, but the main thing is going to be the story is going to have like the overarching story, it sounds like.
We're very eager and ambitious, so we actually did have a really big mechanic change happening for episode 2. Like it just really is okay. Like if we want to, execute on that scope, right? Like ideally, kind of assuming like kind of no numbers involved. Everybody wants to make the game that they would want to play. Right. So, we're trying to figure out what's the game that we can make and what's the best way to deliver that. Right. And when. So.
Well, you have a great foundation in First Strike. So, the sky's the limit as far as I see. All right. So is there anything else you guys would like to add about the game?
During development, it's a really funny story, but we actually had thoughts about, this is way before actually we had the dashboard on the pod, but we did want to make Dex as like a companion to the game. And it's just with Dex kind of being our mascot and whatnot. As you guys know, our CEO has a little penchant for dogs. So that was one of the things that we tried to execute on, but it kind of the technical difficulties involved in it and what it contributed to the story. We won't scrap it or quite entirely. But if it makes sense, we would love to see Dex make his way over to Scraper. It's just it can't kind of like ruin the environment and the setting. It has to kind of like make sense. That way, it feels immersive, right?
Well, as a dog lover, I completely approve of having Dex as a companion or at least a cameo at some point. Even if you like just meet him on the side of a street somewhere and buy some items from him, any way you guys can figure out how to get him in there, I'm all for it.
You can be sure that if we do work him into the Scraperverse, he will be pettable. So that's the Labrodex.
Got to take advantage of
that. Kills my bobblehead idea then for the pod. You could have him technically as a bobblehead in the pod.
Yeah, you could hit his head.
It's really funny that you say that.
Bark or something when you pet his head. That'll be.
I do believe bobbleheads was actually one of our features that we had in the backlog.
Oh man! Well, if he somehow makes it in there one day, it would be too cool, and I'm sure everybody would love it. Okay, great. Well, that does it for another episode of the PSVR Chat Show. Thank you all so much for watching. Guys, where can people find you on social media?
Yeah, so feel free to follow us on Facebook on our Labrodex page. Also, for our Twitter handle, it is at Labrodex INC. Follow us there for the latest news on what we're currently working on for our projects. We have tons of exciting things kind of going on in the company. Following First Strike, we actually have a side Scraper game that we're working on the side. And, we'll give more news on that later on. But also there's Humans 101, which is another company game. game, and maybe we'll have a chance to talk about that here at some point.
Excellent. So yeah, make sure all of you guys go and follow them on their social media and be ready for on July 2nd. We'll have Scraper First Strike coming out. And yeah, thank you once again to everyone and to Jason, the producer, this amazing team of creators, Dorky the Awkward, Lina, Jules, Waverly, Noctauto, Velp, and of course Justin and Shugghead from their respective channels as well, fellow YouTubers. And you guys have a great rest of the night, everyone. Thank you. Bye.